Swinemunde is a beautiful seaside resort on the German Baltic coast. During World War II, it was of no military value other than a few piers where ships could dock. It had escaped aerial attacks as its population grew with refugees from bombed-out cities. On March 12, 1945, the U.S. Army Air Force carpet-bombed the town, killing over 23,000 civilians. This was not a mistake, but part of a genocide campaign to kill German civilians and destroy homes. By February 1945, advancing Soviet forces were near Berlin, having crossed the Oder River, the last natural defense barrier to the German capital. The Soviets paused to replenish supplies before their final push. Millions of Germans were fleeing west on horse-drawn carts, aboard ship, by train, or on foot, after stories of atrocities by Soviet troops against German civilians. This led to a massive influx of German refugees into German towns who found shelter in schools, churches, and public buildings. The Swinemunde railway station was congested with trains transporting refugees and wounded. On Monday, March 12, 1945, at 11 a.m., Swinemunde was destroyed with 1,609 tons of bombs from 671 bombers of the 8th U.S. Army Air Force. No aircraft were shot down since the town had minimal air defenses. Why did the Americans massacre 23,000 civilians at Swinemunde? American reconnaissance aircraft could see nothing of military value in the town, other than small ships packed with refugees offloading. Historical accounts are rare, but a couple writers speculated without proof that the Soviets requested this bombing. But Swinemunde was undefended, so bombing made no military sense. Moreover, there are very few accounts of the Allies bombing targets based on Soviet requests, and any request to bomb Swinemunde would be dismissed as it had no military targets and was far from the main Soviet effort to capture Berlin. The massacre at Swinemunde was just one of dozens of Allied aerial atrocities during World War II. The British began its aerial genocide campaign in 1942 to destroy a future economic competitor. The Germans had surpassed the British in engineering and manufacturing and posed a threat to the British trade that British tycoons wanted destroyed forever. Upon taking over the British Bomber Command, General Arthur Harris issued the following directive. Quote, "The aim is the destruction of German cities, the killing of German workers, and the disruption of civilized community life throughout Germany. It should be emphasized that the destruction of houses, public utilities, transports, and lives are accepted and intended aims of our bombing policy. They are not byproducts of attempts to hit factories." American generals opposed the appalling RAF bombing policy. When the Americans began bombing Germany in 1943, they only conducted daytime raids so they could see military and industrial targets to bomb, while the RAF conducted safer nighttime area bombings on civilian population centers. But after a year, the Americans ran out of strategic targets to bomb. After heated ethical discussions, they joined the British in slaughtering civilians, as evidenced by the now famous pointless destruction of Dresden in February 1945. Many Americans dismissed deaths of German civilians because of a lifetime of propaganda, taught them this was a good war to destroy evil Nazis. They assumed civilian deaths were just collateral damage. But civilians were the target, and incendiaries were often dropped to start fires in hopes of burning down entire towns and cities. These innocent Germans had never elected Hitler, and the country was run as a dictatorship. Germany had never bombed anything in the United States, and bombed British cities only to retaliate after several British bombing raids on Germany. None of this matters anyway, since the Allies were supposed to represent good guys defeating evil. U.S. Army history notes that marshalling yards were targeted at Swinemunde. That sounds like an ominous assembly area for military purposes, but was the American code word for a small rail station found in all towns. Rail lines are difficult to destroy as they require lucky direct hits. The solution was to drop hundreds of bombs so that some hit. Rail lines in the countryside could be bombed, but the term marshalling yards was used to justify the destruction of towns packed with civilians. The Swinemunde Massacre occurred just after Operation Clarion, an American genocide campaign that began in February 1945. German cities had already been destroyed, so towns were targeted to kill Germans and destroy homes. This was very effective, since these towns had no air defenses or air raid shelters and were filled with refugees from bombed cities. This occurred after Allied ground forces had entered Germany and were corralling huge numbers of surrendering German soldiers. The war was won, but the aerial slaughter continued for weeks. This was never mentioned to the bomber crews or the American public, as this U.S. Army Air Corps film demonstrates.
Clarion was one of the most successful missions conducted by the 8th Air Force. A force of 1,372 heavy bombers, escorted by 677 fighters, went in to attack 25 of the assigned primaries. However, due to weather conditions in the target areas of the 3rd Air Division, 7 of the primary targets were abandoned in favor of 11 secondary targets, also marshalling yards. In all, the 8th Air Force attacked 29 targets, dropping a total of 3,895 tons of bombs. Good navigation resulted in the bombers and fighters making good their planned routes and rendezvous. NORTHEIM marshalling yards. 48 bombers dropped approximately 125 tons on the NORTHEIM marshalling yards. Numerous patterns burst squarely on the yards at several points. Lines were cut in numerous places, and the rolling stock facilities and junctions were heavily damaged. BAMBERG marshalling yards. The BAMBERG yards were bombed through 10/10 of cloud by 64 bombers, which dropped 50 500-pounders on the targets. The results were unobserved due to cloud coverage. ANSBACH marshalling yards. 420 tons of bombs were dropped on the ANSBACH yards by 143 bombers with good to very good results. The yards at STENDAL. 73 bombers dropped 250 tons of GP bombs on the STENDAL marshalling yards with direct hits on a large engine roundhouse observed, in addition to at least 120 hits on the rail lines and installations. 4 explosions were seen, and as a large storage area was heavily hit, severe damage must have been done. Large fires in this area were observed many hours later. Wittenberg marshalling yards. At least 90 hits on the rail lines and embankments were observed on the yards at Wittenberg, which was attacked by 72 bombers, blanketing the area with 216 tons of bombs. The yards and a major highway running parallel to them were severely damaged, as shown in later reconnaissance pictures. LUDWIGSLUST marshalling yards. The main station at LUDWIGSLUST and large storage buildings nearby received direct hits and were seen burning by the 48 bombers, which dropped 136 tons in this area. 70 hits on the rail lines, derailed railroad cars, and 2 rail bridges were also severely damaged. ULZEN marshalling yards. The marshalling yards at ULZEN received 250 tons of bombs from 73 bombers. 6 concentrations fell in the target area. 325 bursts were seen on the rail lines, and 4 intense fires were started, including the roundhouse, and a large warehouse which received direct hits. 8 explosions were observed, and the damage was severe. The yards at LUNEBERG. The marshalling yards at LUNEBERG were hit by 39 bombers, which dropped 115 tons. 3 concentrations fell on the target area. 200 bursts hit the rail lines and installations, including the roundhouse and large warehouses. 2 rail bridges and 1 road bridge were hit, and there was an intense explosion among oil tankers in the yards. In the attacks on the following day, February 23rd, 1,211 heavy bombers attacked a total of 18 primary targets, including those that were weathered in the day before. Accompanied by 492 fighters, the heavies dropped 3,316 tons of bombs on these targets. ELLIGEN marshalling yards. 25 bombers laid down 70 tons of bombs on the ELLIGEN yards. 120 bursts were seen in the traffic center, which caused severe damage. CRAILSHEIM marshalling yards. 300 rail cars were in the target area at CRAILSHEIM when hit by 114 tons of bombs from 52 bombers. Railway cars and the main lines through the center of the yard were heavily hit, as were adjoining warehouses. The damage should be most severe. WURZBURG marshalling yards and railway station. The target was the WURZBURG station and marshalling yards, as well as the main yards 22 miles southwest of Schweinfurt. Statistics for the 2 attacks are impressive. In the 2 days, a total of 2,583 bombers put down 7,211 tons of bombs, all 500-pounders, with good to very good results.